Hello, everyone. This is a review of J.K. Rowling's latest book, as well as an evaluation of the Cormoran Strike series as a whole. This is solely an audio recording, so no need to watch the screen. If you have not read the books and you do not want to be spoiled, I would advise you to turn back now. I suppose before we officially start, I'd like to say that this video will not be talking about Rowling's opinions online. Rowling's views are not as surprising as many would like to think. Many raised throughout second-wave feminism in the 1970s hold a particular emphasis on the body, as bodily autonomy and sexuality were the centerpiece of what feminists had on the docket. So to see these debates about the body come up again in the 21st century is par for the course. Sometimes the truths we gather in the first half of our life challenge us in our second half. That is all I will say on the matter, as I would prefer to talk about Rowling's writing instead. First, let's talk about her latest book as of this recording, The Ink Black Heart. There's no getting around it. The book is a disappointment. The first reason, I think, has to do with its length. At 1,024 pages, the book is way too long for what it is trying to do. I say that because her previous book, Troubled Blood, is 944 pages, comparable in length, and yet I did not have this same reaction. That is because in Troubled Blood, the theme of motherhood, the structure of a cold case, the wealth of history between the suspects, witnesses, and the victim, all combined to create an incredible picture of the tribulation of being a woman in the late 20th century, where old traditions clashed with new freedoms. It was a book that J.K. Rowling clearly felt a strong pull to write, and was situated in a place as a female professional to speak her piece. The Ink Black Heart is the story of Josh Bly and Edie Ledwell, who rose to viral fandom after the release of an animated YouTube cartoon that was eventually picked up by Netflix. Edie approaches Strike and Robin and asks them to look into an online troll calling themselves Anomy. Soon after, Edie Ledwell is murdered, and the resulting investigation has the two cross paths with some of the worst aspects of online communities, on the far right and far left. At a bird's eye view, this seems like yet another powerful thematic novel for Rowling to explore. As a maker of a fandom in the wizarding world, her conflict with the online community of her opinions, and the backlash of fandoms when decisions are made of an intellectual property that they do not agree with. But if you dig into the weeds of how Rowling carried this case out, you begin to see how the length of the book really drags the pace down. While Troubled Blood felt like it started early, The Ink Black Heart struggles to find its footing. We are given time with the chat room to Drek's Game, which is a game based off the Ink Black Heart cartoon that runs alongside the series. We spend quite a bit of time learning about other cases the agency is involved with. It is not until around 400 pages into the book where the mystery really picks up. The book has a similar delay to her fourth novel, Lethal White, but also keep in mind that Lethal White was only 656 pages. The setup for Ink Black Heart also has similarities to The Silkworm, in which the fictional edifice of Bombix Mori is a roman à clef for acquaintances of the victim. The game that plays alongside the show of The Ink Black Heart harbors suspects and victims, who we will be seeing later on in the book. But The Silkworm is a speedy 454 pages. Combining the doubling nature of the story, where we have redundancies from hearing information in the game and then in real life, with a massive runtime, while also managing to pack in so much extra, made for a book that, while occasionally gripping, was quite dull. There are several chapters that could have been deleted in their entirety and would have left the story pretty well intact. The redundancies give the reader privileged information because of our access to chat rooms in the game that our detectives do not have access to, which in my opinion is the kiss of death for detective fiction. It is no accident that The Silence of the Lambs movie keeps our suspect indoors and in the dark. It is no accident that in the movie Department Q, Keeper of Lost Causes, we receive a montage of the suspect, but only just before the detectives arrive. I think this asymmetry between reader and character really hurts the narrative, as well as pads the runtime. This volume makes idiosyncratic mistakes that, until this book, have not happened. There's no explanation of the murder at the end, when it is revealed that Gus Upcott is the one who killed Edie nearly killed an alt-right member, and also killed Vicus in Cambridge, and who happens to be Anomy, we are hardly given any sort of words from Strike to connect all the disparate evidence throughout the book. True, we spend a great deal of time uncovering these details along the course of the book, but just because Rowling points at a suspect does not mean the reader is willing to believe her. There is a rhetorical disconnect where Rowling not only has to point, she has to explain. This is why, cheesy as it is, the Hercule Poirot monologue is so important. The handoff of information is between the detective and the reader, not the detective and those present. It is, to be sure, a conceit, but it is often necessary, and at over 1,000 pages, it was basically required in Ink Black Heart. Having gone back through the book and read each section where Gus's name is mentioned, one is struck by actually how little detail is mentioned about him. Granted, his entire personality is that of an incel, in which he has removed himself from most of the social world. But there are gaps in Gus's logic that simply do not add up. Gus is of a particular intelligence, he's musically inclined, and is articulate and driven enough to pursue several different digital avenues in the game and on Twitter. He plans out murders effectively, giving the slip to London police, who spend most of their time chasing the Havening, an alt-right fascist terrorist group. And yet Gus never thinks to go after Strike and Robin after they first appear in Katya Epcott's house, where he happens to be practicing. The only real assumptions that Strike makes is, of course, exactly what happens, that Gus has bugged the upstairs in order to listen in to insider knowledge of the Ink Black Heart. Otherwise, the reader suddenly realizes that much of the structure of the book is designed to alleviate problems of the case. There are too many suspects, so it seems likely that Gus could slip through the cracks in order to kill certain characters. He's a shut-in, so identification is difficult. His family is dysfunctional and pays little attention to him, a combination of abuse and neglect that is ripe for malevolence through invisibility. Gus, compared to other characters, has a strange lack of connection to the others. While previous novels have presented us with an interweaving plot where characters know other characters, Ink Black Heart is far more wheel and spoke. Other characters know each other, sure, and that is actually to the book's detriment, as it seems unlikely for moderators of a video game to be so close geographically to each other. Even in 2015, when the book takes place, much of the English-speaking world may have gone international in the digital sphere, especially in games. But what are we to make of his relationship to Edie? When do they talk to each other? Why did Gus make the game at all? What is his relationship to the Ink Black Heart besides his mother's relationship to Josh? Much of his behavior lacks an articulate explanation and is instead lumped into many vagaries of what we come to expect from an incel online personality. Pickup lines, antagonism towards women. Rowling leans on these stereotypes as explanatory when, before, even if we had a case of a person falling into these categories, we still had a certain idea of how these manifested in the individual mind. I can go on. The book feels so long, but is also missing these insights. Barely any time is given to Gus's relationship with Vicus, named Morehouse in the game, of whom they somehow began some kind of friendship when they made the game together. We hear briefly that, because of their artistic acumen, they became young loners. This is a situation, but is not a story. It provides the basis, perhaps, for how they met, but has no bearing on words uttered and lines drawn. Certain concepts and thematic through lines could have been explored, but are kept in the dark. At this point in the series, we can say Strike is pretty much a pickup artist. We know that Strike is not exactly handsome, and yet still manages to lure in some beautiful women. His magnetism is even conflated with picking up when Strike encounters Madeline's son Henry, and they both are stunned at Charlotte speaking to him in the alley. Madeline rails against Strike that this is what he does, but the mechanics of how he does it and how it relates to a toxic online community of online pickup artistry organized by a man named Kosh is left unspoken. We find out that Strike is luckily not suffering from disease in his leg stump, but the tremors could be psychosomatic. on account of a stressful case involving a bomb going off, perhaps triggering the stress Strike experienced with a bomb taking his leg in the first place. We'll talk about the bomb a little bit later, but there is a running theme throughout the book of real and perceived trauma in the novel, where abuses, both real and imagined, both have effects on our bodies and the phenomenal world. The Upcott father and son suffer from conditions. Sick mothers and fathers are present everywhere. Kay Niven perhaps weaponizes her condition, while Vikas self-actualizes and sublimates his. It is all very good stuff, but while Rowling seems to love explaining the interior thoughts of Strike and Robin, most of what we get in their conclusions on this sickening theme is that, quote, character rules the day. That might be true, but there are ambiguities associated between these moments that could have been explored, quite like I felt Rowling did in Troubled Blood. In Troubled Blood, Strike spent a great deal of time thinking about his parents, both biological and surrogate, and what sort of individual that produces. When Strike was asked to participate in a reunion for Johnny Rokeby, he declined. What did Strike have to say to any of them? And what had Rokeby done for Strike? This is also a case of learning about Strike's stubborn behavior. Strike's chip on his shoulder is confirmed when, in Ink Black Heart, we hear that Strike learned some Greek and Latin to spite a man he spent time with as a boy, and he stole the books to keep learning after he left. Troubled Blood gave us the material to learn about a deeper character point. Ink Black Heart is a sick and morose novel, but hardly any of that touches Robin and Strike. There is strangely no personal connection to this, and his reunion with Prudence never comes about. We could suggest that Strike realizes that he has been living with poor lifestyle and dietary choices, but does that compare to the sort of illness we see? Sure, it is a conflation of illness and lifestyle towards a more pure living situation, but these do not address core issues of being and personality. Neither partner realizes that they live just as lonely personal lives as the people they have investigated. Both have cut themselves off from a deep personal connection, sometimes willingly, sometimes blindly. There is a sickness manifested in Strike's leg or in his smoking addiction, but the opportunity to address his spite or his predilection towards detection go unmentioned. While Anime digs up dirt on the Ink Black Heart, Robin and Strike dig up dirt as well, and are paid for it. Not only that, but the partners seem to love it, not to mention that they're good at it. It is these sorts of ambiguities that could have been great for tangential cases. Perhaps these cases go wrong, or there is some backlash from people they've spied on. You've ruined my life, these people would say, throwing dog shit and bags at their door and yelling in their office. Perhaps Robin would express doubt at the validity of what they are doing, and it is up to Strike to remind her of the good they have accomplished. Perhaps there would be some very real antagonism towards Strike and Robin by the police, who despise private investigators. By the end of the novel, and other novels, our two detectives have made Scotland Yard look bad. Where is the tension? Where is the ambiguity? My problem is that the sickness that infected Anime, the sickness that infects our subject matter, is not a theme that infects the mechanism for that subject matter, which is detection, nor does it seem to cast any doubt or light on our characters. This problem exists elsewhere. There is no moral equivalency to the online world, where perhaps we might imagine that while the internet is now a necessary part of our lives, it is also a lesion that can grow into a full-on illness. Only our villains are so maligned by the internet. One could have imagined that Robin and Strike become more aggravated, more anxious, more problematic towards each other with longer time spent surrounded by a toxic online environment. This never happens. With so much time spent in a game, on Twitter, the sociological change could have easily occurred with the length of this novel. Once again, our characters seem sterilized from their experience. The most obvious moment where this sterilization occurs is, again, when a bomb goes off in Strike's office. Pat and Strike seem less shocked from this scenario and instead feel a bland annoyance. When Strike's lung is punctured at the end of the story, after a gruesome fight with Gus Upcott, Robin makes jokes. It may be the case that Rowling loves her characters so much that, in the event that she needs them to suffer, she mediates the impact even as it occurs. There is some very real pressure that needed to be put on our characters. Physically, yes, but more importantly, psychologically. This did not happen. I'd like to try and expand this review to doing a retrospective as a whole, as I think this book rounded a corner, so to speak, on the series. Rowling has mentioned in interviews that she could do 10 books, so finishing number 6 means we are coming into what a final act would be like. Then again, judging by the lengths of these books, perhaps we are only halfway through, and we can expect multiple volumes of just one book to come out to compensate. Who knows? I think many of the rules and systems that Rowling established at the beginning of the series became brittle in The Ink Black Heart. The Strike series is 2 parts detective investigation, 1 part Lifetime movie, where Strike and Robin have a will they, won't they romantic involvement, similar perhaps to the X-Files or Bones or Castle TV shows. By book 6, the steps taken to ensure the two stay apart is a single glance at the Ritz, and it is enough to cause such a dry spell between the two that their romance is largely put on ice. Either the two adults are overly rational and are simply making a pros-cons list of why not to fall in love, or they are overly irrational, and they create strange circumstances that hide their desire, but reveal it just as much in plain sight. In Ink Black Heart, Strike dates someone who looks exactly like Robin, Madeline Corson Miles. The results of this lead into, again, equivocal territory. Whereas before this upward trend was balanced, we have lost the plot and gone into absurdity in Ink Black Heart. One glance, after all. Out of all the elements that make up the series, it is this part which has me the most concerned for the future. Another worry is in discovering how, in Rowling's writing, she is more willing to use her style to placate or cover up certain challenges that could improve her writing, rather than take risks. Many character successes and failures in Ink Black Heart prolong the story needlessly, which allows Rowling not to investigate further character or thematic depth or interesting set pieces, but to broaden the pool by adding more archetypal characters and expanding into many pointless scenes. There is very real work that needed to be done. When Strike attempts to discover what kind of a person Robin is by inspecting her new flat, the results are embarrassing. The reader realizes that just as Robin has given herself over to the agency, so too has any hope for Robin's character been sacrificed for procedural detection. With all the pages thus far, one would imagine that there was plenty of time. Strike is stubborn, wry, unafraid to bully while on the clock, desires a woman who is somewhere between a prostitute and a maid, somehow lures deeply beautiful and clingy women, and is the epitome of atavistic, throwback, 20th century rugged individualism. Robin is more caring, perhaps, and possesses a certain delicacy to Strike's brute force, but many of her symptoms and repressions, her desires, even her likes and dislikes, do not seem to manifest. Who is the woman who loves Strike? And what, beyond Robin's effective detection and cooking, does Strike find attractive? One of those used to be Robin's indifference to Strike's personal choices, treating him like an adult. But now, with Strike relying on her for health choices, we can see those barriers break down. In future installments, we can expect other barriers to inevitably fall away, when really there was a great opportunity for there to be some tension as they got together, as they realized some of the costs. One detective scenario that Rowling has conspicuously avoided has been the cloistered or bottled detective story that many in the genre go for, most famously Agatha Christie in her books like Murder on the Orient Express. Often because Rowling's writing writes outward in lateral moves rather than down and deeper, she has become one of the best writers for worlds and a sense of simultaneity. Her scene writing is impeccable because of it. A bottled mystery, where characters were stuck in an isolated place, is a hallmark of the genre, and one where I think Rowling would struggle in a good way. Often in stories, placing characters like this in a situation that they cannot easily pull away from gives us a chance to learn deep insights. It would keep her character count down, force her to develop interactions alongside a timeline, and would force her to perhaps edit out all her tics towards this expansion. In the Harry Potter series, Hogwarts continued to expand in our minds because Rowling was continuing to find new schools of magic, new academic content, new tests the students had to take, new teachers, So even when we think of Hogwarts as a centralized location, it was porous in the way parts moved in and out. What I realized in reading the Harry Potter series was that this expansion served the benefit of Rowling, save for some logic problems like that of Hermione's Time Turner in Prisoner of Azkaban. Strike series has this same problem, where Rowling gives herself claustrophobia in her own writing, and so decides that perhaps London is not good enough. Perhaps 2 detectives in a single case is not enough. In previous books, especially perhaps Career of Evil and Troubled Blood, she was able to use history as a way to mediate this desire. But in my opinion, her writing suffers from an unwillingness to go deeper. Plenty of writers in the past have done a lot with a little. Shakespeare and Milton and Melville indicate a well-trod style that comes from the King James Bible. Rowling's style does not allow for this, as it contains a pace and easiness that is like comfort food. As such, she must address this in the form of content. Unfortunately, while many of the cases feature the kind of darkness that makes for very significant outcomes, that significance is nowhere to be seen for our main characters. Possibly the peak of this kind of experience so far came from the Career of Evil, Lethal White, and Troubled Blood books, where the preliminary novels gave her the time to establish the framework, and the resulting narratives were either gripping or intriguing. Even her first novel, The Cuckoo's Calling, made for great detecting. Most of the action concerned timelines, witnesses, who was at the flat when our victim died, and who might have had a motive. Strike is often, throughout the books, mentioned the importance of means over motive for the crime. This may be true for reality, but it's a challenge for fiction. If we are being honest with ourselves, fiction and crime are directly opposed to each other, if only because this traumatic and violent circumstance is mediated through fictions we tell ourselves, and often poorly. For anyone who knows about the behavioral science unit, seen Mindhunter, or read about the process of discovering how serial killers become what they are, the truth that we discover is that the through lines between these, though they may differ in their particularities, are quite similar in conceptual design. Neglect, abuse, bedwetting, pyromania, animal cruelty. We all know the signs to give us pause. I think that, again, Rowling's desire for means over motive might be for her and her style of writing, rather than for a crime fiction, which needs motive. With motive, you provide an opportunity for a dialectical shift from the killer to the detective. Every Sherlock has his Moriarty, but a lack of a rival to strike occurs in every novel. What does a killer have to do with a private detective who catches them? Perhaps the villain does not have to explicitly communicate with Strike in this way, but always the best crime fiction at least communicates thematically and implicitly some blind spot or weakness or repression in our detectives themselves. In Harry Potter, Voldemort's Horcruxes manifested this duality, this dichotomy between Harry and Voldemort in a literal way, much to the fantasy genre's credit. But what I worry about is that J.K. Rowling creates literal manifestations as a curtain that hides nothing, that hides the void. The curtain is the object to be scrutinized, and if you can pull the curtain back, there's nothing there. There's no there. One might criticize this by suggesting that, after all, J.K. Rowling's not going for that kind of novel. And I wouldn't press this point had characters not gone into their own heads and appealed to character in order to dig for this kind of depth. Strike and Robin spend a great deal of their thoughts in reflective awareness, and when pointing to both of these and some outward observations of character, like we previously stated with Robin's flat, we can see at least a basic attention towards character that Agatha Christie's Poirot often does not have. One cannot err on the side of character and yet ignore characterization for so long. Rowling's biggest skill lies in her parenthetical phrasing in her writing. Read any paragraph, and one is likely to find it, smuggling information to the reader without them knowing it. Part of me feels as though this is also the problem. And as we continue her series, to me the opportunity cost of failing to address the deeper qualities of these characters has caused damage that cannot be undone. I still look forward to her books for entertainment value. When it comes to carrying around the ideas of what I read in my head, she never comes up. While other people can live with that, I will forever feel that the Strike series was a missed opportunity to use the realism of detection as a challenge for herself. I appreciate you listening to this rambling review, and I hope I made my points clear. Thank you again.